Esoteric World, Chapter 17, Belgium and England, 1886 to 1887. In July 1886, HPB relocated to Ostend, Belgium, and continued writing The Secret Doctrine. In early 1887, several English Theosophists urged HPB to come to London to be the center for theosophical work there. In early March, however, HPB became seriously ill with a kidney infection. Doctors, both Belgian and English, gave her only a short time to live. She drew up a will and made provision for her body. Yet spontaneously, overnight, she regained her health. Having been offered by her master, she reported the options of dying or living on to complete the secret doctrine. In May 1887, assisted by Bertram and Archibald Keightley, she moved to London. 17A Countess Constance Waschmeister, October 1886 to April 1887, Ostend, Belgium. In October 1886, I rejoined HPB in Ostend and found her settled in comfortable enough quarters. She welcomed me with all the warmth of her genial nature. We recommenced our monotonous but interesting life. The thread began being taken up from where it was last broken, and I watched with delight how piles of manuscripts for the secret doctrine were increasing. Our near vicinity to England caused people once more to come buzzing round HPB, and we received several visitors. Towards the end of winter, March 1887, HPB became very ill. To my great distress, I now began to notice that HPB became drowsy and heavy in the middle of the day and often was unable to work for an hour together. This increased rapidly, and as the doctor who attended her pronounced it to be an affection of the kidneys, I became alarmed and sent a telegram to Madame Gebhardt to tell her of my apprehensions and to beg her to come and help me. I was thankful when I received a cordial response to my telegram and knew that in a few hours I should see Madame Gebhardt. When she came, I felt as if a great burden had been lifted off my shoulders. In the meanwhile, HPV was getting worse, and the Belgian doctor, who was kindness itself, tried one remedy after another, but with no good result. I began to get seriously alarmed and anxious as to what course I should adopt. HPV was in a heavy lethargic state. She seemed to be unconscious for hours together, and nothing could rouse or interest her. Finally, a bright inspiration came to me. In the London Theosophical group, I knew there was a Dr. Ashton Ellis, so I telegraphed him, describing the state that HPP was in, and entreated him to come without delay. I sat by HPB's bed that night, listening to every sound as I anxiously watched the hours go by, till at last at 3 a.m. the joyful sound of a bell was heard. I flew to the door, opened it, and the doctor walked in. I eagerly told him of all her symptoms and described the remedies that had been applied. Whereupon he went to her and made her drink some medicine that he had brought with him. The next day there was a consultation between the two doctors. The Belgian doctor said that he had never known a case of a person with their kidneys attacked as HPBs were, living as long as she had done, and that he was convinced that nothing could save her. Mr. Ellis replied that it was exceedingly rare for anyone to survive such a state for so long. He further told us that he had consulted a specialist before coming to Ostend who was of the same opinion, but advised that in addition to the prescribed medicine, he should try massage so as to stimulate the paralyzed organs. That night passed quietly, and several times the following day, Mr. Ellis massaged her until he was quite exhausted, but she got no better, and to my horror, I began to detect that peculiar faint odor of death which sometimes precedes dissolution. I hardly dared hope that she would live through the night, and while I was sitting alone by her bedside, she opened her eyes and told me how glad she was to die, and that she thought the master would let her be free at last. Still, she was very anxious about her secret doctrine. I must be most careful of her manuscripts and hand all over to Colonel Olcott with directions to have them printed. She had hoped that she would have been able to give more to the world, but the masters knew best, and so she talked on at intervals, telling me many things. At last, she dropped into a state of unconsciousness, and I wondered how it would all end. It seemed to me impossible that she should die and leave her work unfinished. And then again, the Theosophical Society. What would become of it? How could it be that the master, who was at the head of that society, would allow it to crumble away? The thought came to me that the master had told HPB that she was to form a circle of students around her and that she was to teach them. How could she do that if she were to die? And then I opened my eyes and glanced at her and thought, was it possible that she who had slaved, suffered, and striven so hard should be allowed to die in the middle of her work? None of those who knew her really understood her. Even to me, who had been alone with her for so many months, she was an enigma with her strange powers, her marvelous knowledge, her extraordinary insight into human nature, and her mysterious life spent in regions unknown to ordinary mortals, so that though her body might be near, her soul was often away in commune with others. Such were the thoughts which passed through my mind as I sat hour after hour that anxious night, watching her as she seemed to be getting weaker and weaker. A wave of blank despondency came over me as I felt how truly I loved this noble woman, and I realized how empty life would be without her. My whole soul rose in rebellion at the thought of losing her. I gave a bitter cry and knew no more. When I opened my eyes in the early morning light was stealing in, and a dire apprehension came over me that I had slept and that perhaps HVP had died during my sleep, died, died whilst I was untrue to my vigil. I turned round towards the bed in horror, and there I saw HPP looking at me calmly with her clear grey eyes as she said, "Countess, come here." I flew to her side. "What has happened, HPB? You look so different to what you did last night." She replied, "Yes, Master has been here. He gave me a choice that I might die and be free if I would, or I might live and finish the secret doctrine. He told me how great would be my suffering and what a terrible time I would have before me in England, for I am to go there. And when I thought of those students to whom I shall be permitted to teach a few things, and of the Theosophical Society in general, to which I have already given my heart's blood, I accepted the sacrifice, and now to make it complete, fetch me some coffee and something to eat, and give me my tobacco box." I flew off to do her errands and ran to tell Madame Gabbard the good news. Archibald Keightley, February to April 1887, Ostend, Belgium. In the early months of 1887, there were some few members of the TS in London who felt that if Theosophy did not receive some vital impulse, the center there would be confined to a few individuals only who were pursuing and would continue to pursue their studies. There were many anxious discussions as to how a vital interest could be awakened in the truths of Theosophy and how attention should be restored to the ethical philosophy. We all felt that we were working in the dark and that we were ignorant of the real basis upon which the philosophy rested. Obviously, we required a leader who might be who might intelligently direct our efforts. We then determined each separately to write to H.P. Blavatsky, who was then in Ostend, laying before the founder of the TS and the messenger of the masters the position as each of us saw it. We asked her to reply in a collective letter, giving us advice as to what to do. She replied, however, to each individual, writing letters of 8 to 10 pages. The result was this, that we all wrote and asked her to come over and direct our efforts. She had told us that she was writing the Secret Doctrine and must finish that before undertaking other work. Nevertheless, we wrote to her that there was, we believed, urgent need of her directing presence and that she could finish the Secret Doctrine in London as well as or better than in Ostend. After receiving her reply, which urged objections, Mr. Bertram Keightley went over to Ostend during the later part of February or beginning of March and talked matters over with her. She agreed to come to London at the end of April, provided that we find her a house for somewhere a little out of London in which she could work in peace. Soon after he returned, I went over to Ostend rather unexpectedly to myself. I naturally went to call after leaving my luggage at the hotel. Madame Blavatsky received me with the greatest kindness, although previously on that occasion I was almost unknown to her. She insisted that I should transfer my things to her house and stay with her while in Austin. At that time, she was occupying the first floor of the house, and a Swiss maid to wait on her and Countess Washmeister to keep her company. I was at once introduced to the Secret Doctrine with a request to read and correct an exercise, a privilege I naturally did not avail myself of. Madame Blavatsky at that time had never ventured out of her room since the previous November and never came from her writing and bedroom into the dining room until the windows had been closed and the room well warmed. Several attacks of inflammation of the kidneys had warned her that the slightest chill was dangerous to the completion of her work. At the close of my visit, I returned to England with renewed assurances of her arrival on May 1st, and under pledge to return and assist Madame Blavatsky on her journey to London. I had been in London many hours when one of our members, Dr. Ashton Ellis, received a telegram from Countess Washmeister saying, as I recall its tenor, that Madame Blavatsky has had another inflammatory attack on the kidneys, that she was comatose and her life was in the utmost danger. Dr. Ellis went over to Ostend and attended her. He told me that he was extremely surprised, and so were the others who knew her serious condition, to find her recovering in a few days. Her state then was so critical that she began arranging her affairs before the comatose attack came, burning up papers and having a will written down so as to be able to be ready for the end. Later on, she told me herself that her life was saved by the direct intervention of her master. Her endurance manifested itself even at this point, for as soon as she could leave her bed, she was at work on the Secret Doctrine. In the middle of April, Mr. Bertram Keightley again went over, and I followed him about the 25th or 26th. We were rather in consternation because Madame Blavatsky said she could not possibly leave in such weather as then prevailed, especially on account of her late serious illness. Her landlord said she must leave, for the rooms were let. Count Washmeister had previously left for Sweden to attend to urgent business affairs until under promise to join Madame Blavatsky in London. Staying in the house with us was a friend of Dr. Ellis who assisted in the removal. The fated day came, and place of in place of being bright but cold, as had been the case 2 days before, the morning proved to be cold and foggy with a steady drizzling rain falling and penetrating all it touched, the thermometer being about 40 degrees. We fully expected Madame Blavatsky would decline to move, though her uh, and thought her justified in doing so. Nevertheless, she appeared that morning in full marching order. The trunks were packed and all was ready. The carriage arrived, and Madame Blavatsky was assisted into it, and off it drove to the wharf. It must be remembered that she had not had a window open in her room while she was in it, and would not scarcely allow it open while she was out. For 6 months, she kept her room at a temperature of over 70 degrees, believing that anything under that would kill her. Moreover, she was almost crippled with rheumatism and could hardly walk, and was a constant martyr to sciatica. On getting to the wharf, we found the tide low, and in consequence, there was a narrow gangway leading to a very steep incline to the steamer's deck. Imagine our dismay. Madame Blavatsky, however, said nothing, but simply grasping the rails, walked slowly without assistance to the deck. We then took her to a cabin on deck, where she sat on the sofa and only then betrayed the pain and exhaustion caused by our effort. The journey was uneventful so far as Dover, save that for the first time in her life, Madame Blavatsky knew what the preliminary qualms of seasickness meant and was much puzzled. At Dover, the tide was still lower, and as a result, four very stalwart piermen had to carry her to the top. Then came the greatest difficulty, for the platform is low and the English railway carriages steps very high. It required the united efforts of all the party and the piermen as well to assist Madame Blavatsky in a crippled state into the carriage. The journey to London was uneventful, and with the help of an invalid chair and a carriage, she was safely lodged in the house we had secured for her. Secretly, I was afraid the journey would have serious results, but whatever was the reason, she seemed to enjoy better health for some time after her arrival in England, and then she had for months previously. The day after her arrival, she was at work on the Secret Doctrine at 7 a.m. Julia W. Keightley, wife of Archibald Keightley, 1886 to 1891, Pennsylvania. Living some 1,000 miles from England, I never met Madame Blavatsky in person. Like others of my acquaintance, I first heard of HPB coming across the SPR pamphlet denouncing her as an impostor and asserting the Hodgson Coulomb slander as a true fact. Soon, however, I began to realize through my own experience that she was not what she seemed to be. The evidence I had caused me to the evidence I had caused me to ask HPB to teach me, and that fact that I was fully trusted in and believed her is precisely what gained for me the fulfillment of my wish. The mental attitude of belief sets up in our aura and in our inner bodies magnetic and attractive conditions, very different to those contraction and densification which exist where doubt or criticism fills the mind. A literal quickening of my aura and my inner body took place. The contraction in which men and women enfold themselves is too little understood. To be known, faith and devotion must first be had. After HPB accepted me as a pupil, no rules were laid down, no plans formulated. I continued my daily routine, and at night, after I fell into deep sleep, the new life began. On waking in the morning from a deep so profound that the attitude of the previous night was still retained, I would vividly remember that I had gone, as it were, to HPB. I had been received in rooms which I could and did describe to those who lived with her, described even to the worn places or holes in the carpet. On the first occasion of this kind, she signified to me her acceptance of me as a pupil. After that, she would receive me in varying fashions, showing me pictures which passed like panoramas across the walls of the room. At other times more rare, I would awake to find her standing at the foot of my bed, and as I leaned upon my pillow, her sign language would begin. The harmonies of nature would fill the moonlit room, while the wondrous living creatures passed across while the wondrous living pictures passed across the wall. All this was perfectly objective to me. I was fully awake of all the surroundings, to all the natural sounds of the night, and as I have taken my pet dog into my arms because it shivered and whimpered at the sight of her, all the expressions of HPB's face became familiar to me. I can see her now, her old bedgown, what dingy old gown was ever so cherished, folded about her as she opened out space before me and then too expanded into her own real being. I have hardly more than a half a dozen letters from her, and these contain no teaching. They bore upon external theosophic affairs and have this peculiarity. At night, she would tell me to advise certain persons of certain things. I would obey, giving her as my authority, and in a few days afterwards, but never long enough for the full voyage, would come her letter giving and writing the instructions previously heard at night. Thus, I was enabled to prove that I really heard her wish overseas, for always the request concerned some sudden emergency which had just arisen a day, 2 days at most before. I was able to check off my experience in this way, as I was also able to speak at times before an event occurred.